All right, welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining today. I've been really fascinated with your work for quite a few years. You have released some absolutely awesome documentaries on YouTube around Samadhi. What is Samadhi? Inner worlds, outer worlds, and exploring this space of awakening and really like in a very nuanced and I feel like you touch on it in such a deep way, in a way that I haven't really seen very much elsewhere. And so I really appreciate your work and excited to dive into various aspects of your work and bring this to the people listening.
Thank you.
Awesome. Um, so in your Samadhi documentaries, there's a couple aspects of what you talk about that I would love to explore and get your thoughts on. I think a good starting place that we could dive into this stuff is, and what we were talking about a little leading up to this episode, is like the difference between like gradually building up to Samadhi versus like going all in and going full bore into it. And I relating this to my personal experience where like I've noticed a couple experiences where it felt like I went really fast and then had a massive contraction afterwards, or like an ego backlash, if you want to call it that. And I would love to hear your thoughts on, what does it look like? What does it look like for you in the people that you work with and in yourself to like gradually and naturally unfold all of these patterns and habituations of the mind, rather than like all at once? And how do we sort of play the long-term game, or like work with it long term rather than trying to reach everything and like as fast as possible?
hmm Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so for me, in the traditions, there are sometimes the direct path traditions, and then the more long path traditions, and so typically, like the way I like to talk about it is I just call it the pathless path. And so, for me, it's not one or the other. There's an ongoing sort of purification of the self structure. So the traditions that like Vipassana or these traditions where we're going into the somatic field, purifying the samskaras. Any tradition where there's a sort of unlocking of energy and a development process that's happening within the self structure. To me, that's all the long path, and that's the purification and development of the avatar, of the conditioned self, which is necessary. To me, it's not, we can't bypass that. So we need this vessel to have a human experience, and that ongoing purification and development is part of it. But at the same time, if we just focus on that, and we're not inquiring into who we are, that finding out that we're not that, we're not limited to that character or that physical being, then our path will not lead to awakening. We have to inquire, who I am, who am I, that is having this human experience, who is aware of all of this. So that direct inquiry, is part of it, and I think the two converge at a certain point. So the classical enlightenment is really when that vessel has been purified to the point where the energy flows freely. It's no longer there's no longer this effort to purify or to rewire it, but it's the energy is naturally flowing within the vessel, so that awareness can simply be present, unobscured, undimmed by that veil. So yeah, so for me, both, like at our retreats, we're working in both dimensions. And I liken it to, it's like burning a candle at both ends. We're working on the purifying the self structure and the jhanas and all the stages, and then at the same time waking up from the illusion that we need to go through any process. We simply arrive in the now to realize who we are. So it's a bit of a paradox, but there's no escape from that paradox.
Yeah,
The allowing of that paradox is, I think, another level of understanding of just how this whole human experience flows.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's so interesting to me how paradoxical all of this stuff is, and how it's so hard to like get full clarity, or at least in my experience, like it's like there's these contradictions that are like very mind boggling, or hard to grasp with the mind,
Mm-hmm.
maybe perhaps.
I think there is, when it comes to the direct experience as well, that not knowing is actually the gateway into direct experience,
Right.
which it is paradoxical to the mind.
Mhm.
The little limited mind will never know what the direct experience is, like
Mhm.
we can only have direct experience when that little mind is it sort of enters into a space of not knowing. And when it's totally surrendered, it's sort of like an awe, or like a non-dual kind of space of being blown open.
Yeah.
And it's in that space where we can we can be in direct experience, but that little mind never knows. It can, because it's the filter. It's just like a reducing valve. So the reducing valve can never take in the truth
Mhm.
of what we are. It
Right.
by its very nature, it is a limitation.
Uh-huh. How
Mhm.
does it land with you? Something I've been sitting with is like the mind. Yeah, I'm curious if this resonates, that the mind only generates distinctions between things, and that is like its main function, and then it can't do the opposite. Is that how
Mhm.
you kind of relate to it?
Yeah, the mind is always separating. Yeah, it's always, um, yeah, separating one thing from another. So, like at the very root level of that separation, there's that separating of a witness and what's being witnessed.
Hmm.
So that, even that very deepest level distinction, it's creating this duality that we're experiencing. So that, when that mechanism of that split drops away, then, who's left, at witnessing,
Yeah.
and it's not a witnessing of, or the witness or the awareness, just is inseparable from what is actually arising.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah. Um, yeah, that brings me to there. There's an aspect of this process that I felt deeply confused about, or that I've been sitting with for quite a while, and I would love to hear you talk about it a little bit in the Samadhi documentary, of this sort of balance between desire and desirelessness. Or there's, said another way, it's like, you talk about in the documentary how sometimes like the desire to like escape the illusion of the self can actually like reinforce the identity, because you're like giving it like a sort of reality. If you're like trying to like push away the ego structure and like
Yeah.
to like get rid of it or overcome it, inadvertently it like actually verifies it, or like it makes it stronger.
Mhm.
And so that like linked with this, um yeah, you talk about like desire. There's like different, I'm trying to, I'm curious about like relating with desire, right? Because in the documentary you also talk about like to achieve awakening or something, it has to be with such like intensity of, I think the quote is like, a man with his hair on fire trying to find water, or like drowning and trying to gasp for breath. And it's like this
Yeah.
intense desire, but also like somehow like wanting it so bad can also reinforce it. So I'm like kind of conflicted between these two things, and
Yeah,
I'm curious how
yeah.
you're relating or you sit with these facts.
Yeah, so this is the tricky thing is, that, in Zen they have this word, they actually, there's a word for this sort of impulse that is drawing us to awaken. So it's the Hoshin, or the way seeking mind, or beginner's mind. There's like this impulse to awaken that, for some people it just is there, it's just alive, and their hair is on fire for awakening. But at the same time, when that impulse to awaken happens, the first thing the conditioned mind does is it asks the question, how do I do it, how do I make it happen? And as soon as it does that, the seeker is born. The seeker is
Mhm.
trying to make something happen. So at the retreats, it's this constant recognizing how the conditioned mind is mediating. It's trying to make it happen, it's trying to do something. Whereas, the truth, when the awakening happens, it's so ridiculously simple. Like there's actually nothing for the mind to do. There's no technique, there's no process. It's when that seeker gives up, all grasping and all doing. If we can just remain present continuously, allowing energy to build in the present moment, then this flip, this unfolding happens, and there can be a recognition of who we are, that we're not that mind, but we've given the mind so much attention and importance that it thinks it's in the driver's seat, or it is in the driver's seat, but it thinks that there's something for it to do in this process.
Mhm.
So really, the entire game is to recognize that delusion of the mind, that there's something that needs to be sought, that is going to happen in the future. And so if we can drop that, and just be with what is continuously, and being with what is, another layer of delusion of the mind will come up. All whatever needs to be purified, if we can just be in
Mhm.
the present moment, then there's this unfolding, and the unfolding. This is the paradox. Like upon awakening, the awareness, that which we seek has always been present. We don't
Mhm.
have to attain it or cultivate it. So the first, recognition is like, how did I miss that? Like, it's so simple, it's so stupidly obvious, but yet there's this unconscious movement, this whirlpool of the mind that is in play. It's like Patanjali's teaching, the awakening samadhi or yoga is the cessation of the whirlpool of the mind,
Mhm.
and and that's it. We can't bypass that. We could have glimpses, or we can have awakenings, and get a sense, but that whirlpool of the mind, it has to be transmuted in some way, or the veil comes back, and we go back to
Mhm.
sleep over and over, and that seems to be what is happening with people on this path. They get glimpses, and then the pull of the mind brings this illusion back again. So
Mhm. Yeah, something I really appreciate about how you frame this work and that I really resonate with is like it's almost, I hear you say continually like this purifying of it's almost like this karma, like working through all the karma that's still there, working through all the addictive mental stuff that doesn't want to be let go of, and um yeah, perhaps I'd like to hear your thoughts on how this relates to dyad self-inquiry, because as I've worked with your dyad self-inquiry practice, um, and you can also explain it, but for the listeners, how I understand it is like you're asking who am I, but you're doing it while you're eye gazing, and then you're stating and noting what comes up with the intent of like this, and this is how it feels like it relates, like letting go of all of the, every time you say something it's like, oh, that's not it, that's not it, that's
Mhm.
not it. So I would love to hear you riff a little bit on dad self-inquiry and your
Mhm.
it seems to be a central practice that you're moving towards with this work, and
Mhm.
yeah, any thoughts that you're having on it these days?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, it's identical. You know, the self-inquiry dyad process is identical to what's happening in meditation. You know, for me, like the meditation, the two components in meditation that that work are being present, continuously present, and then just being equanimous or allowing whatever is going to come up to come up, without resistance, without reacting. So the dyad self-inquiry is just an intensification of that process. So when you're working with a partner, there's this witness, this being across from you that you're looking into their eyes, and you can't zone out, you can't escape. You're there in the moment with this person engaged in this process. So it's just a sneaky way of getting people to be continuously present, and the practice itself is just observing. We're just using the mind as a reporting tool. So this is the tricky part, for the mind to recognize in this process, is that, we receive this imperative. Our partner says over and over to us, tell me who you are. And we receive this imperative. And so the mind, um, the technique is to just report when we have this intention to directly experience who we are. Then we observe what unfolds within the self structure as a result of receiving that imperative. So we have this intention to, awaken, or to know directly who we are, and then stuff happens in the self structure. It just unfolds, and then we share that with the partner. So the mind in this process is just reporting on itself. Basically, it's just a reporting tool. And it's so the trick in this process is to really understand that the mind, it's not going to come up with an answer to who you are. It's not an answer on the level of mind. It's not like I say the right words and I got it. It's the mind has to kind of take a back seat and just be used as this tool to convey what's coming up within the mind and the body, the emotions, feelings, all of that, and then just really communicate it to the partner. And it's in that communication process that we become free of these samskaras, or these conditioned patterns. And because they originally, all they are is incomplete communications or incomplete experiences. So if we had say a childhood trauma or something, that experience, whatever it was, might have had a very strong charge. So that little child is going along happily in life, and then this thing happens, and it's too much to experience in that moment. So the energy of it gets pushed into the unconscious, and then it becomes a little program that's running in the unconscious until we communicate it out at another time. We have a complete experience of it, and then that energy is freed. So so this, it's essentially a clearing process, and then at some point in the retreat, when we have that intention to directly experience the truth of who we are, either more stuff will come up, or we will have that direct experience. At some point, that intention will align with that moment, and we will awaken where a good percentage of people will awaken at these retreats. So in the Charles Berner method, he said, best case scenario, usually about 30% of people will have an awakening at these retreats. And I would say my experience with the past retreats has been around that level. So it's mysterious. It doesn't seem to ever be, more than that. It's always around 30% of people will have that experience.
Wow. That's enticing. It feels, I mean, I can speak how powerful the practice has been, just doing it for even an hour with someone. And I can't imagine doing it for 3 days or more straight. I can only imagine the intensity at which it could cut through patterns of mind, and the efficacy at which it could do that. I'm very fascinated as well about this thing you call clearing, or like clearing this stuff. I've been sitting with these days of, there's a lot of modalities around working with trauma and working with unconscious. And I find as I experiment with them, a lot of times it brings me deeper into mind, and I get really caught up in all the stories of what the pattern is trying to tell me. I'm very curious about how you're relating to this, because my sense is that in the dyad self-inquiry, it's more like noticing the intensity of the energy arising from the trauma, and like almost like clearing it on an experiential level, or another way of framing it is like, when the pattern arises, my first instinct is to go deep into story and go into mental habituation. And it almost seems like the dyad self-inquiry is a way of like, when the pattern and the traumatic experience gets like re-triggered, it's just like being able to sit with the intensity of that trigger, and not like grabbing onto the urge to like go into an elaborate mental pattern around it.
Yeah, and it's literally, like an example could be, like a childhood experience of being sort of forgotten or not noticed, right? So the feeling of that comes up in the dyad. There's that whatever's happening in the body, and the technique is to convey it completely to the partner, to have a complete communication, so that person who felt forgotten as a little kid, they might feel like, like they might shout like, I'm here, or or there might be a something that just comes through in that full complete communication, whatever that is, whatever that feeling was that was sort of shut down and pushed away, whatever it takes to get it across to their partner, what that felt like. That's what we want to do in this process. We want to completely, like, really get them to understand, and feel and sense, what this is, and by really communicating it, having it received without reaction. The witness is always completely neutral, so that allows the complete pattern to come up, to be expressed, and then released. And there's something mysterious in that process, because if the witness doesn't receive it, it doesn't really work. If the witness is just zoned out, or they're like kind of in their own thought process, it really doesn't work. So there's something about the completion of that cycle, and that full communication that really allows these samskaras to be released.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, there's also something here around no escape, which I would love to touch on as well. And I think you were starting to touch on it a bit, but it seems to me that the act of like looking deeply into someone else's eyes while doing self-inquiry like adds a level of it. It like ups the no escape, um,
Mhm.
like the inability to escape. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on like having that as a no escape, or perhaps other the value of no escape, or how
Mhm.
you what it looks like to intentionally craft spaces and environments that don't give the ego any escapes through phones and laptops and books and conversation and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, for me, like the traditions where they have intensives, like the Zen session, or the Vipassana retreats, or some of the yogic traditions where they're very intensive periods of practice. To me, all of these containers, they really work when they're, it really, the self structure gets to a point where it desperately wants to, engage in its pattern, and escape from the discomfort of whatever is happening, and it pushes that conditioned structure to a point where something has to give. It has to let go. So rather than escaping and reactivating the pattern, the energy, or the structure, the conditioned structure, sort of opens, surrenders, and the energy is freed from those patterns. And I think the esoteric traditions, even Christianity, the Christian mystics, knew this mechanism as well. And I think even, I've been, for the next film, I have a little part on the esoteric meaning of the cross in Christianity. To me, the cross represents that sort of no escape for the ego. The human is literally nailed to the cross. There's no escape, and there's this surrender. Jesus, even on the cross, his heart was open. He was um, able to realize his true nature. And to me, that's what the cross represents. It's a sort of metaphor for, so you could say these retreats are a sort of self crucifixion. We're putting ourselves on the cross, or in these conditions of no escape.
Absolutely. I find
Mm-hmm.
that in your documentaries, I loved how you talked about the various religions and how they kind of center on samadhi, or no escape, or whatever, some sort of realization, or realization in general. Uh, yeah, there's something I'm curious about. You mentioned, all right, when Jesus on the cross, his heart is open. I'm curious how you work with emotional experiences during this process. I've noticed like sometimes self-inquiry, as I've learned it, and from the places that I've learned it from, sometimes in my own experience, it has triggered this sort of like detachment, or this sort of like not letting myself feel any emotional experience whatsoever in the veil of being the witness. And I have this intuition that perhaps that with your work, it's almost like witnessing and also like being deeply in the experience, and in heart cracked open, or like not actually a form of detachment, more as like witnessing fully and experiencing fully. And I'd love to hear you riff on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this process, the emotions come up, and there seems to be a sort of alchemy that happens with emotions. So for me, what we're doing in these retreats is we're transmuting the emotion into feeling. So, and the way we do that is, the emotion is always made of two components. The emotion is, there's a sensory sort of component, so if, like, take something like anger or sadness, so there's a feeling in the body that comes up, but there's also a belief. There's something, if I'm sad about something, right? Like I lost my job or my family member, whatever it is, there's some concept or belief in the mind that is entangled with that feeling. So when we, in these practices, when we allow the emotion to come up, we stay with the sensory part of it, with no resistance, but without engaging in that pathological. Sometimes there's a repetitive thought pattern that is connected to the emotion. So we want to stay sort of on the somatic level with what is unfolding without letting the mind, really get a hold of that pattern and repeating it. And so if we're able to do that, then that feeling part will grow, and there's like a wave that moves through, and it arises and passes away. And if we can do that, then once as soon as you can drop the belief around an emotion, then it is transmuted in that moment into feeling. It's just a phenomena that's arising within the self structure. So that's kind of how we move through these things. And different traditions use different words. In Vipassana, they talk about equanimity. Just allowing everything to arise and pass away. So if we're just equanimous with whatever's coming up, not getting caught in the story of what it is, but just staying in the somatic field, on the root level of sensation, then that's how it transmutes, and that's how we move through this process.
I love that. I love that take on it and that way of relating to emotions. I've been experimenting with that a little bit and noticing how there's almost like an ease and like a spaciousness around like intense experiences that I've noticed come after like just relating to them purely as sensations and not as. And yeah, I've just been noticing like how as I'm relating with emotions on a sensation level, it seems to be that they're no less intense, but at the same time there's like an ease around them, and I don't know how to explain it, but it's just like they're kind of just like happening and the intensity is there. But yeah, when all the other stuff gets added on them, they feel like so much, that like the magnitude of them feels so much more, and it feels like they're so much more real and important and meaningful. When it's the sensations, it's like there is sometimes pain and discomfort and all of these things, but it's there, I don't know, there's just like they're just kind of moving as they wish.
Yeah, that's it. And so, like the beliefs, the mind aspect is a sort of a form of resistance. So there's, whatever feeling is coming up, like there can be pain or, that discomfort in the body, but as soon as that mind resistance is there, then it becomes suffering. So there's suffering on top of whatever sensation is there. So yeah, if we can just feel, and it can be, the intensity actually sometimes grows when we don't feed it. These samskaras sometimes, as soon as we can be equanimous, then the deeper level of that samskara can come to the surface. So whatever's attached to that might come up, and they are almost like waves that come up from the unconscious. And the more equanimity we have, the more will continue to come up.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on fear, especially. This is the one that's felt the most difficult to work with for me, especially after some deeper retreats or experiences with psychedelics. I've noticed this sort of existential fear can get really, really intense to the point of like just, yeah, overwhelming, intense fear of, I don't know who I am. And it almost feels like, yeah, the ego construct just grasping for any thread and not finding anything.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I'm curious in your work, in the spaces that you cultivate, in the retreats. Um, yeah, what are ways that you and your retreat participants work with fear and work with existential fear, especially?
hmm So yeah, so when fear comes up, to me, it's a sign that the people are working correctly in whatever they're doing. You know, it means the ego construct is starting to loosen its grasp. You know, and that's a good thing. You know, so allowing that process to happen, but also when that fear is coming up, it's a very productive time for self-inquiry, you know, to ask, you know, to whom does that fear belong? You know, and is this my fear? Like, who am I? You know, or is that fear within the conditioned self? You know, is that the conditioned I that, you know, is it's feeling confused, it's feeling like it's not in control, it doesn't know what it is or who it is, and you know, so that when that fear comes up, it's the perfect time for self-inquiry. And you know, it's really, you know, the false self is made of these patterns. Like the flip side of fear is hope. You know, both are a projection into the future. You know, so fear is the conditioned self thinking something bad's going to happen, or you know, there's something around the corner that it doesn't want, and the hope is that same mechanism, but it's just projecting something that it does want. You know, so both of those things, you know, are you know, we make those processes conscious and let them go, and they go together. They're two sides of one sort of mechanism. So we abandon hope and we abandon fear at the same time. So like, to answer your question, you know, we just, fear is part of the process. It just is the letting go that the self structure goes through. So whether it's, you know, on the cushion in meditation, or it's in a self inquiry dyad, or it's in a 5-MeO DMT experience where, you know, the self structure, sometimes we're able to surrender, you know, consciously. Other times it's more like submission, where we have no choice, you know. So, but the more we can consciously surrender, you know, the self structure, you know, it gets used to that letting go. Like my first experiences with, you know, awakening, like the little Dan character was terrified, but but now, you know, there is an energetic sort of flip that happens, you know, within the self structure, you know, depending on the different states that we're in. Sometimes the energy, when it reaches the crown chakra, you know, if we haven't gotten used to that, there can be quite a generation of fear within the self structure. But once we get used to it, it's actually blissful. That transition can be actually incredibly blissful. It's just like diving into an ocean. You know, once you've done it so many times, it's awesome. You know, it's just, there's nothing to fear, and the self structure knows that. Eventually, it's like, okay, there's nothing to fear here. It's, you know, this is just something I get used to.
Wow, that's incredible. I was about to ask before you shared of like, is there a familiarity with the no self experience that happens after a while that like doesn't fully trigger that fear response? And
Mhm.
yeah, that's sometimes when I'm in it, it's like, oh no, there's no way I could get on the other side of this, is the story. um but it's really helpful to know that perhaps there is a familiarity or a comfortability that we can achieve with these um and no self states or samadhi states or jhanas or what you call it.
Yeah. Within the self structure, there is a component, that is learned, that is actually, wired in. And to me, it's, another analogy is like the roller coaster. When we first go on the roller coaster, it could be terrifying, but the more you go on it, there's something that just gives way. There's a knowing within the self structure that if I just let go, actually, it's awesome. If I just trust this and drop that resistance, then it's actually way more awesome than if I hold on and contract. So,
Yeah.
but it's, bit by bit, it happens sometimes over time. Some people can just let go and just blow the doors wide open, and they're okay with that. But I think there is a rewiring process, and that fear is there to kind of slow things down sometimes as that rewiring happens as well. So it is, there are some there to me, there's always a middle way with it. We don't want to just go to one extreme and do some kundalini yoga practice for like 2 weeks straight and blow our chakras open. That could be damaging to the nadis and the energetic structures. But at the same time, a bit of that could be productive and creating new pathways and new wiring. So I always feel like whatever is happening on the energy side, we have to have the consciousness to kind of balance that out, too, so that energy and consciousness are sort of growing simultaneously, and not one or the other, being predominant.
Consciousness being like approaching truth and like contacting.
Yeah, just that capacity to allow and witness without identification. So yeah, just being just sort of resting our sense of I as consciousness, rather than that sense of I being identified with the phenomena or the whatever's unfolding in the energetic world there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very curious, somewhat tangential topic. What is the place do you see of like studying these, as well as, because I mean, when you're in this container, it sounds like there's no escape. You're not studying, you're not reading, you're not. Then when you're outside of it, you mentioned like working with jhanas, working with kind of stages of awakening. I've heard you. I'm diving into Daniel Ingram's work a lot these days, and I've noticed you say some of the stages that he refers to of like arising and passing, and then like equanimity, and then sort of like dark night, like fear arises. Like, what is the value in your mind, or how do you relate to like studying these and kind of understanding the territories to not get stuck in like, yeah, too much energetic or too much of like the terrifying, or like kind of balancing them out, and then as well as like having the containers.
Yeah, it's a balance, I think, and for me, like, I was really into Buddhism, studying the sutras, and I went through that phase of trying to make a map of the territory and with my mind and everything, and so I think like the key is there are valuable insights, I think, from these amazing beings who preceded us. So we, I think again there's a balance. We don't want to push away all of that, but at the same time, now, like when I go into reading mode and observing the with the analytical mind, the difference is, like, now it's like I know that the answer is not the truth of who I am will never be found in those things. So all they are, best case scenario, they're pointers, the now, to this moment, to just being. So, so upon awakening, like invariably people, when they awaken, they're like, this is so simple, it's so stupid. Like, and all these books and all this doing and yoga practices, and it was all just my little conditioned seeker doing all this stuff. And so there's this delusion that these books and these teachings and techniques will, if it's the conditioned self learning something and doing something in order to awaken, in order to find the truth, it will never do it. It will always fail. So, which that can be very productive. Eventually it'll do everything. It'll try every technique. It'll go down every rabbit hole, and then once it's completely failed, then it's in that total failure that awakening is possible. Once it gives up the seeking. So it again is a paradox. It's like, it reminds me, there's a Ramakrishna quote, and he said, only two types of people can awaken. One is someone who's not burdened with that intellectual learning, and sutras and books and all of that. And so they have beginner's mind naturally, basically. And the other is someone who's practiced and read everything. They've gone to every tradition, every technique, and they've eventually come to realize they know nothing. So that again is we have to come to this beginner's mind, truly to awaken. But the best of the best teachings are just pointing us towards that.
I'm curious, as a teacher, as someone that runs these and facilitates these deep self-inquiry retreats, what have you found your role being in like facilitating people who are walking the path and are I guess the story I have, or how, what I'm curious about is like, all right, let's say someone goes into self-inquiry practice there and they have like their first awakening, and like a lot of existential fear, or like, as we said, comes up. You as a teacher, having worked with this for longer and having extensive work, are you able to like go to this person and say, and like help them understand that like there is a familiarity over time that will develop, or like it's not, like, to not feel like it's the end of the world? Or is there any like or I'm curious how you relate to your role as like facilitating and teaching this stuff. Is it more of like standing back and just kind of letting it happen because people will need to just go through their own thing and to like not engage at all? Or is there a certain like having familiarity with this territory? Is there a way to like kind of guide along, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's a little bit of both. I think for me it's the process itself is really it. If people really engage in the process, doing the dyads, doing the meditation, really it's like a stripping away of illusion, and everybody has to go through that process themselves. And the only thing I think the facilitators, usually at these retreats, there's 2 or 3 facilitators that walk around, and we'll just sort of interject little questions occasionally when if someone's getting stuck in the mind. To me, I see myself as like a signpost, just going, well, maybe go this way or this way. Not telling people what to do, but pointing out maybe a pattern that's in play, or if a fear is coming up, maybe just asking a question like, who's aware of that fear in this moment? Who's aware of what are the sensations in the body that are part of that fear? Those types of questions. Bringing people into the somatic field when they're getting caught into the mind, those types of things. So just kind of little nudges or little unstickings And it usually just comes from experience, like just from knowing, just seeing where people tend to get stuck. So yeah, I see myself as a kind of like a signpost at these retreats, just you know showing what I've seen over and over, and there is a kind of way of facilitating in this Charles Burner tradition that is fairly standard as well. Over time they've been doing it for decades, so there are certain little tricks, I guess you could say, for helping people along the way.
Awesome. Was he the guy that wrote the Enlightenment Intensive book, or am I thinking of someone else?
That's right. Yeah, he came up with the Enlightenment Intensive whole program, and the technique that we use at the center. So the technique has evolved a little bit. There's a few little differences at our retreat, but for the most part, it's Charles Burner's uh, technique. So,
Awesome.
mhm,
I'm noticing we're coming up on time.
mhm.
I would love to hear one last, if the listeners are interested in your work and diving deeper, love to hear if you could plug the retreat, or perhaps the digital retreat, or any of the stuff that's on the radar for you in the next few months and what you're releasing and working on.
Sure. Yeah. So the retreats are all available. They're on awakentheworld.com. The Samadhi Center is located in Canada. We're a pretty small retreat center, so our retreats tend to book up really quickly. We're already booking into next year. So part of what is exciting me is to actually develop an online retreat that is creating conditions of no escape. It's sort of an experiment. It's connected to the Samadhi Part 4 movie. Just bringing all the teachings that we use at the center into an online experience. We're hoping to launch that in December of this year. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, or keep checking out the site, that will appear on there at some point.
Amazing. And for anyone listening, I'll put all the links to the website, to the retreats, and to the documentaries on YouTube that I've been mentioning in the show notes in the description. Dan, it was so nice speaking with you today. You were so insightful.
Great to speak with you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.